Hello and welcome. Has Barack Obama lost patience with Iran and abandoned his policy of engagement with the possibility of considering military action to stop its nuclear program? In just over a year, the US president has gone from outreach to outrage. In 2009, he extended a hand to the Iranian people in a speech on Nowruz, the Iranian New Year, raising hopes that the US might be able to achieve a breakthrough in relations. Since then, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's government has ignored Mr. Obama's deadline for negotiations, pushing the White House to turn to sanctions, particularly in light of increased military activity in the region. The Obama administration has emphasized in recent times that all options are on the table, implying that a military option may also be considered if Iran attains the capability to build a nuclear bomb. But Tehran says its program is peaceful and solely designed to address its energy needs. On Wednesday, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei harshly criticized President Obama for making a nuclear threat against his country. So today we ask, how likely is it that a hardline US approach will deter Iran from pursuing its nuclear program? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Send us an SMS or an email, and we'll also take your phone calls on the show. Well, joining us now is Abbas Milani, the Director of Iranian Studies and a consulting professor of political science at Stanford University in California, from where he joins us. We also have in the studio here in DC, Flint Leverett, the publisher of the website www.raceforiran.com. He's also a senior fellow at the New America Foundation, a non-profit group that identifies the next generation of challenges for the United States. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show. And Professor Leverett, if I may start with you, sir, is there a real major shift in policy here? Is there a genuinely much harder line approach to Iran, or is this just posturing?
I think that when the Obama administration came to office, they had a vague interest from the president in pursuing a strategy of engagement, but they never really figured out and sorted through the hard choices of what serious strategically grounded engagement with Iran would take. As a result, the kinds of initiatives they put forward, the public ones like the Nowruz message and so forth, basically fell flat from their perspective, didn't get the kind of response from the Iranian side that they wanted. To my mind, all they've really done is succeeded to some extent giving engagement a bad name, but they feel like now, given the response from the Iranian side, they need to move toward harder line, even potentially more coercive options. So in the first instance, they're working hard on sanctions right now.
How much was triggered by Defense Secretary Robert Gates' comments about not having a sort of cohesive and a coherent policy on Iran?
Well, I think the Gates memo, the leaked memo, needs to be seen in the context of divisions within the administration about what the next steps are. I think Gates has been pretty clear, both under President Bush and now under President Obama. He would not support a military confrontation with Iran. He thinks that containment is the better option. And I think that why containment is problematic for some in the administration is because it can be portrayed as essentially giving up on preventing Iran from acquiring a certain level of nuclear capability. So Gates has not been getting the kind of traction within the interagency process that he wants. I think he was trying to leapfrog that impasse with this memo, but I think there's still forces at the White House in particular who don't want to go down that road.
Well, let's bring in Dr. Abbas Milani. Good to have you with us as well, sir. Now, I wonder, while campaigning, Barack Obama discussed the idea of engagement without preconditions, as he said it. Now, why do you think the dynamic has changed now?
Well, I think the dynamic changed because his efforts to, in fact, engage Iran were not responded to. In fact, when he wrote a letter to Mr. Khamenei, he was ridiculed for it. The level of rhetoric and action by the Iranian regime that basically defies both what Obama had suggested and what the international community had requested have increased. The number of centrifuges have increased. The testing of missiles have increased. Iran's interference in neighboring countries has, by every indication, increased. So I think it is not a one-sided deal, as Mr. Leverett seems to suggest, that the U.S. Did not make an effort and the door was open there. Mr. Khamenei is on record as saying that there is very little to discuss with the United States and that the United States is out to destroy us.
Well, Dr. Milani, let me put an email to you, if I may, sir, that came in from a viewer from Somalia who wrote in saying, the Obama administration's hardline approach would harden the tone instead of changing it. The issue should be discussed, and a mutual agreement based on mutual interests can solve the matter. First of all, are there any mutual interests here? Do you think that could be on the table? And secondly, I wondered to what degree you see the chance of an outside mediator facilitating progress. Turkey, for example, has volunteered to step in here and be some kind of mediator here.
Well, I think the idea of negotiating with Iran is a very good idea. I have been advocating this for a very long time, but I think negotiations should not be just on the nuclear issue. It is wrong, I think. It has been wrong for the United States to simply focus the negotiations on the nuclear issue. Iran and the United States have a whole range of both issues, points of contention, and points of interest. The Afghanistan establishment of the government of Karzai in Afghanistan, for example, was the best example. Iran was very cooperative. Iran negotiated with the United States in establishing that. But the United States, in my view, should negotiate with Iran. Even today, I fully agree. And I think this whole policy of exempting Iran from this known first strike nuclear program that the Obama administration indicated was a grave mistake. I think it has helped the hardliners in Iran. It has exactly done the opposite of what it was supposed to do.
Okay, Professor Leverett, let me bring you back in here and ask about some of the comments Dr. Milani's made about it not being just a one-sided thing from the US, that Iran had its agenda, its hardline. I'll put it also in the form of an email from a viewer, Adam bin Daoud, who wrote in. He says, the only way for peace with Iran is for the US to be fair. And I wonder, when you listen to what Dr. Milani says and looking at the dynamics here, where is there any mutual ground for negotiation?
Well, I think there's a lot of grounds for negotiation. Professor Milani mentioned one issue, Afghanistan, but I think on a whole host of regional challenges, whether it's in Afghanistan, in Iraq, with regard to regional security more broadly, on the nuclear issue, basically neither side can achieve certain fundamental interests that it has without a better relationship with the other. The United States can't accomplish important things it wants to do in the Middle East without a better relationship with Iran. And I think that there are certain fundamental national security and foreign policy problems that Iran has, which it can't address or can't optimally address without a better relationship with the United States. I would also take issue with the characterization that the Iranians rebuffed Obama's overture. In response to the first Nowruz message from President Obama in March of 2009, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei came out publicly the next day and said, with reference to that message, you say you want a better relationship. Well, if you change your policies, you change your approach toward us, we will change too. And Iranian officials have told me that this was a very deliberate formulation so that Obama could take steps that he would hopefully be prepared to take to show in concrete terms he was really prepared to put this relationship on a different footing. From an Iranian perspective, in terms of the substance of American policy, as opposed simply to rhetoric, nothing has changed. And that, I think, is really what, that is what is creating the lack of movement, the lack of progress.
Professor Milani, there was also the issue, I guess, of the legacy of the Bush administration and a sort of very strong indication that certain characters there, Vice President Dick Cheney and so on, were very, very aggressive in wanting to take on Iran militarily as well. I wonder, sir, if, when you look at the current situation, the way things have changed, whether you see the end of any diplomatic path right now.
I don't think so, and I certainly hope not. I think the diplomatic path must continue. But I think one of the factors that complicated the diplomatic path, and it was a factor that neither the Obama administration nor Mr. Khamenei could foresee, and that was the rise of the Green Movement. I know Mr. Leverett seems to dismiss the Green Movement as a passing aberration, but I think it is a very important, and I think it's a historic change in the landscape of Iran. And I don't think either the Obama administration or any other administration can continue negotiating with this regime without considering the existence of that very powerful movement and without considering what this regime has done to many of its own leaders. So the atmosphere in Iran, what Mr. Khatami, the ex-two-time president, calls the creation of a garrison state, makes it very difficult to negotiate just on the nuclear issue. There should be diplomatic negotiations. As I said, I've been always for them, but they should include the nuclear issue as well as the human rights issue, as well as the financial entanglements that the United States has with Iran, Iran's claims against the United States. All of these things should be on the table unconditionally. Both sides should come with a clean slate and have a what they call frank discussion.
Okay, Professor Leverett, do you see no merit in the changes perhaps with the Green Movement on the ground there in Iran? And I wonder to what degree there is the risk of sanctions unifying the public behind President Ahmadinejad.
Well, as Professor Milani said, he and I have different views about the Green Movement. I think it would be a serious mistake for the United States to let some infatuation with the Green Movement distract it from what its really critical strategic objectives are. I do not believe the Green Movement represents any kind of fundamental challenge to the Islamic Republic's basic stability. I think the social base for this movement is shrinking, not growing. It is becoming a marginal element in Iranian politics. Even if you accept Professor Milani's characterization of it, the fact is, if you say compare Iran today to China in the early 1970s, the Nixon administration pursued its opening to China when Chairman Mao was still in power and the Cultural Revolution was still going on. The United States needs to keep its eye on the ball here. In terms of where things go from here, I think the United States is going to need to deal with the Islamic Republic as it is today, not as some might want it to be, but as it actually exists. And in that context, I think that any kind of coercive measure, whether it's sanctions, much less any kind of military attack against Iran, it will dramatically boost popular support for the current political order.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you both to stand by because we have to take a very short break. We'll have more of our discussion when we return. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the changing tone of Barack Obama's approach to Iran. The US president's aggressively pursuing a new international sanction idea against Tehran for its refusal to end its nuclear program. Iran says its nuclear project is for peaceful purposes, not for developing weapons. Examining the issues, I have Dr. Abbas Milani, co-director of the Iran Democracy Project at the conservative US-based think tank, the Hoover Institution. He's joining us from Stanford in California. With me in the studio is Professor Flint Leverett, who teaches at Penn State University, is also with the non-profit New America Foundation, a US-based public policy institution. Let's get back to our questions here. And Professor Milani, if I could get back to you on this idea that America has to deal with Iran the way it is now, that Professor Leverett was saying. To what degree do you think President Ahmadinejad is a direct obstacle to any kind of debate or any kind of negotiation?
Well, I don't think President Ahmadinejad is the key person in determining Iran's foreign policy. The key person is Mr. Khamenei, and I fully agree that the United States cannot base its foreign policy on pipe dreams. It has to base this foreign policy on reality on the ground. But I think the difference is what we see in the reality on the ground. Mr. Leverett seems to see a shrinking base, but the Islamic Republic doesn't seem to see a shrinking base. They just banned the two-term president of the country from going to a disarmament conference in Japan. We have a movement whose leaders include a two-term president, head of the judiciary, a prime minister for 8 years, and we also have, as at least a de facto supporter of this movement, Mr. Rafsanjani, who's one of the pillars, one of the two pillars of this regime, is a person who has probably more than anyone else in the world a key role in making Khamenei what Khamenei has become today. So the idea that this is just some passing aberration, a romance that some of us in the West have with it, and that the United States should be hard-nosed, is missing the reality on the ground. The United States should be hard-nosed. The point of comparison is not, as Mr. Leverett keeps repeating, China 1971. The point of comparison is Russia, Soviet Union 1982, where the Reagan administration for a while refused to negotiate with Soviet Union. Then George Shultz came and said, look, we have to negotiate with these guys. We have a whole range of issues, but we want to also negotiate human rights. We also want to negotiate Helsinki. That's the approach that should exist. United States had never had relations with communist China. Opening that relationship is different than what we have today.
Well, Professor Leverett, we had an email question. I'll give you a chance to respond as well, but this came from Kenya, and a viewer by the name of AM wrote in saying, the US is to blame for whatever Iran is doing now. For its disarmament policy to work in the Middle East, the US needs to start with Israel first. How central really do you think Israel is to the issue of Iran-America relations?
I think that the person who wrote the email makes an important point, that it does appear in many quarters of the region, in many quarters of the world, like the U.S. posture toward Iran on the nuclear issue is basically singling Iran out for special attention when we ignore the reality that Israel has many nuclear weapons by all of the available accounts. I think that if we really wanted to be serious about preventing a nuclear weapons-free Middle East, we would be approaching this on a more regional basis. In terms of the specifics of the Iranian nuclear issue, at this point, essentially, what Iran is doing is it is mastering the fuel cycle. It is mastering enriching uranium, which at a certain point could, in theory, give it a nuclear option. But we are continuing to insist that Iran abandon uranium enrichment, which it is not going to do, which it is not required to do by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And what I think we need to do on the nuclear issue is to get serious about recognizing Iran is going to enrich uranium, but talking with the Iranians about the verification measures, monitoring procedures that would be in place to manage the proliferation risk of that activity.
And Professor Milani, I've got this question that came in just now from a viewer sent by Twitter, if I could put this to you. It's from India, and it's Adnan Malik, who wrote in saying, a hardline approach will not deter the Republic. Similar approaches in the past made them more determined to continue.
Well, I fully agree that only a hardline approach, in other words, the idea that we will not negotiate, we will only threaten, we will only embargo, will not work. I think that is a self-evident truth. It hasn't worked in the past. It didn't work during the Bush administration. If anything, it helped consolidate this regime in the past. But my suggestion has always been that there should be negotiations, but there should be negotiations on all of these issues. There should be negotiations as much on human rights as the nuclear issue. It is a strategic error, I think, that the West has made in the last 20 years, that it has single-mindedly focused on the nuclear issue, and the way it focused on the nuclear issue was also wrong. For many years, the Bush administration denied Iran the right to enrich uranium. That was wrong. NPT allows Iran to enrich uranium. But the same NPT that Professor Leverett refers to also says that if a country is found in breach of NPT regulations, then the right to enrich uranium is suspended. And now, IEA has at least on 3 occasions found Iran to be in breach. So that, in fact, NPT calls enrichment of uranium an inalienable right of every nation, an inalienable right, which says that right is abrogated when a country lies, cheats, tries to hide its programs, and the Islamic Republic, unfortunately, has done all of these.
So, Professor Leverett, you disagree with that?
I don't believe the treaty says. I mean, the treaty says, every country signed up to the treaty has the right to the full enjoyment of peaceful nuclear technology. I don't believe the treaty talks about those rights being abrogated.
Let me ask you who you think, Professor Leverett, who you think has the upper hand right now? Is it the US or is it Iran when it comes to this standoff? Is there a position that makes one stronger than the other?
No, I think that the U.S. will continue its current drive for a sanctions resolution in the Security Council. It will probably in the next couple of months get a rather weak resolution that will authorize measures which won't have any significant impact on Iranian decision making. And then the Obama administration will be back to having to confront some very, very hard strategic choices about how it deals with the Islamic Republic.
Professor Milani, just a thought with Russia and China have been on the scene to some degree supportive of Iran up to a point. Anyway, where do you see that dynamic changing? Do you see any pressure from Russia or China having any influence on this matter?
I think we are beginning to see some pressure from China and Russia, but the Iranian regime is going out of its way to make sure that that pressure does not translate into full support for a new resolution. We also see Iran very actively courting Turkey and Brazil to bring them on board in its diplomatic front. It is spending millions of dollars in Africa to try to get countries in Africa on board for supporting its nuclear program if and when it comes to a vote. There was a wonderful article in The Economist that sort of outlines the extent of the regime's activities and the amount of money that they're giving away essentially to African governments in hope, in lieu of the promise of help in the international community. Without China and Russia, I think, as Professor Leverett indicates, this will not be a very serious resolution. And on the question of NPT, it is not a question of what he and I think. We can refer to Article 4, 5, 6 of the NPT and other articles in there. We can refer to the resolutions of the IAEA. The evidence is very clearly there.
Well, of course, I'd like to debate this more, gentlemen, but I have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Professor Leverett, thank you very much, sir. And Professor Milani, good to have you with us as well.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for being with us with your questions. Now, remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified of upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, April the 22nd is Earth Day, and we take a closer look at a massive floating collection of garbage known as the plastic vortex in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The rubbish heap is now twice the size of Somalia or France. We'll speak with Captain Charles Moore, who first discovered this remarkable patch 13 years ago. Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.